Hi, this is Alex from PHP Academy and welcome to this basic CSS tutorial. In this video we're going to go over what CSS is. We're going to look at how we implement a style sheet onto our page that we can actually create styles in. We're going to take a look at classes and selectors and just a few differences, the main differences between them. And then we're going to look at selecting elements on a page, so not just assigning classes or IDs to elements, but we're going to look at just selecting various elements. I'm not going to show you them all because would be here all day, and also I'm not going to get in too much depth about what CSS is in terms of how it works. I'm just going to give you the basics that you need to know to progress your CSS knowledge and go on and start writing CSS. So we'll just look at the basics. We won't go into too much boring detail about it. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is take a look at our document overall. Now in my text editor I've created a file index.html. This is just going to be the page that we're working from throughout this series, and this is going to be our sort of document workspace, if you like. So obviously the first thing we need is some kind of document. I'm going to be using the HTML5 doc type, and we are going to be using some HTML5 elements. At the time of recording, HTML5 is relatively new, but these things might not be supported in all browsers. I'm going to be using Google Chrome throughout these tutorials, so if you're following along I recommend you go and download Google Chrome, and then at least you won't run into any errors. We're also going to be touching on CSS3 as well. However, this is a general CSS tutorial, so we're going to be looking at CSS2 and CSS3 properties as well. So yeah. Okay, so the first thing we want to go ahead and do is actually create our doc type. So I'm going to use doc type here and HTML. Sorry, I need an exclamation mark just in there, and I'm going to close that there. So that's our doc type. That's how we start an overall document. I'm then going to go ahead and create my HTML tags, something that you might be used to seeing, and then I'm going to go and create my head tags. I'm going to do the same but for body, and we're pretty much done here. So that's all we need for an HTML5 document layout. Not sort of anything too clever or full. We've just got head here that we can contain anything like metadata, our style sheet more importantly, and then body is where our elements are going to go inside, and any scripts that we include would go in here as well. So the general rule is styles at the top, scripts at the bottom, unless you have any scripts that need to be executed before any elements load. However, how do we go ahead and implement our style sheet? Well, before we do this, I'm going to take a look, talk briefly about what CSS is, why you should use it, how we're going to use it as well, and how it roughly works. Like I said, we're not going to go into too much detail. So CSS, it stands for Cascading Style Sheet, and cascading style sheets. And cascading style sheets are style sheets that within cascade through different styles, where we are selecting different elements. That's essentially it. So in simple terms, if we have an element here and we have an element here, and this could be an input field, it could be a div, it could be a paragraph, a span, any HTML element. If we apply a style to this, so for example if we make this first element, the text within it, bold, and then we make the text within the second element bold as well, when we go to do element 3, if it belongs to the same class as element 1 or element 2, so let's say we just called the class bold and we made this bold, if we gave the same class to this it would be bold. If we then changed it to if we gave it a class of italic, we wouldn't call it that, but we'll see more about that in a moment, then this would be italic. What would then happen is if we say put element 1 out again, it would remain bold. If we then changed element 1 or if we gave this a different class, so for example if we said we wanted element 1 to now be bold and italic, it would do that. It would just cascade down the document. I'm giving a really bad example of this, but hopefully by the end of this part of the tutorial, you should have picked up roughly how CSS works. You might even know roughly how it works. You just might be here to learn a bit more about it and how to be a bit more efficient in it. So how do we include our style sheet? Well, in HTML5, we no longer need to specify the type, as with most tags like script and things like that. We don't need to specify the type. So to include a style sheet, we say link rel equals. We still need the rel, and we say style sheet. So that's saying link to this style sheet. As like I just said, we don't need a type. The type would usually be text /CSS. If you're using a doc type of HTML prior to 5, go ahead and include the type, but I'm not going to be doing that. And let's see, we need to include the link. So I always get href confused with source. So when you're including a script on your page, you'd use source, but make sure you use href. Now I'm going to go ahead and include my style sheet. So let's see, I'm going to be keeping all my style sheets, or the primary style sheet that we're going to be using, in a folder called CSS. So let's just go ahead and create a new file. This is going to be our actual style sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and I'm going to create a folder called CSS. I'm already working within a directory here, CSS, but I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder called CSS. And inside of this, I'm going to give my style sheet a name. And obviously, I'm going to use the .css extension, so make sure you watch out for that one. And I'm going to call it primary.css. Now, the reason I always choose the name primary is simply because you really, when you're working with style sheets, should only be working with one style sheet, or you should use includes. Now we'll look at that a bit later. It's not a massive issue at the moment when learning, but really you shouldn't have lots of different style sheets unless you have a ridiculous amount of difference between your pages. For example, if you have lots of different elements on a different page, you might include specific style sheets on a specific page. Anyway, we're getting past the point. Let's go ahead and include this style sheet. So CSS /primary, if I can spell it correctly, .css, and that's it. We're done. We don't need this ending slash like we normally would. Again, we're using HTML5. Okay, so now we've got our style sheet included. Let's go into our browser and refresh. What's happened? Nothing. We don't have any elements on our page. We don't have any styles to style them elements, and therefore, nothing has differed from just a blank document. So now I'm going to go ahead and talk a bit about classes and IDs, and when we should use classes, what they're for, and when we should use IDs. Now, let's just say I'm creating a page and I want a main container area for a page. How many main container areas, i.e. there's only ever going to be one, do you need on a page? Well, the answer is 1. So for this, we would style it using an ID. Think of it as something unique, like a person. A person, there's only one of a person, of one person, but you can have a group of people. Now, we could characterize a group of people as, I was going to say all having hair, but I guess some people might not have hair. Let's say everyone breathes. Okay, so generally people breathe. So we would say that as a category, a class of people, they all breathe. So we can we don't have to style each person to breathe. It's getting a bit past the point, but let's go ahead and create our main container. A div is just it stands for divider. It just means an area on a page that we can place things within, and again we can style this as well. So I'm going to give this an ID of container. Now what I've done is I've created an area where the entire contents of my design can go in here, okay, and I can style this by using the keyword container, okay, and because it's an ID we have to use a special way of referencing it. Now inside we might, for example, have a couple of links, so let me go ahead and create some links. Okay, so I'm not going to actually link these through, I'm just going to pop a hash in there. So this is link 1, and this is link 2. Now, these two links are going to have something in common. They're both going to be a specific color, or they might both be bold or underlined or not underlined, as browsers usually default underline links. So I'm going to give these both a class, and I'm going to say, let's say, what can we call it? It's always hard when you're trying to think of a class name. Let's just say special. Okay, I'm not gonna mess around trying to name things properly. One tip I can give you is to name things properly. So the point is that these both have the same class name. Now, just a quick as a rule of thumb, you can't have more than one element with the same ID. So if I was to come down here and go div ID equals container, and in that, and content in here, then this is not allowed. It would work, but it would be rendered as an invalid styles, I guess. So IDs, only one exists. They're unique. It can be a container, maybe an asset container, a header area, although if we're using HTML5, we'd be using the header element. You know what I mean. So with a class, you can have as many on the page as you want, as many. So now we need to think about styling these, and I'm going to teach you how we style them. So we're going to style our container first. You can see that on our page at the moment we've just got 2 links, okay? Nothing special. 2 links, a container which at the moment is invisible. Now at this point I'm going to go ahead and we're going to take a look at the element inspector in Chrome. Now at the start of the tutorial I mentioned to download Chrome. Chrome or Firefox work really well for this. They both have element inspectors. In Firefox you need to download it. It's called Firebug. In Chrome it's already there. All you want to do is right click anywhere on a page or on a specific element. It doesn't matter, usually I just sort of click anywhere and then traverse through where I want to find. But if you right click on an element and click inspect element, you see you get this handy pop-up here. Now, we're going to be using this a lot through the series because it's extremely useful when you're actually front-end developing. You can change the styles here, you can see which styles are assigned to which elements, and it's extremely useful, and it makes your work a lot more efficient. So get used to using this, look through it. These tabs aren't really relevant in what we're doing. But this Elements Explorer is absolutely brilliant, and you can see that as I'm hovering over things, it's actually showing where things are. I think we've got the whole container there, which spans the whole width of the page. We've got these 2 links here. So, and obviously our body and head, which you can't see. So, our container, we want to go ahead and style this container, okay? So how do we go ahead and style it? I'm not going to do anything special here. I'm just going to give it a background color. We're not going to look at anything too advanced in this tutorial, but if I want to go ahead and style the container, I open up my style sheet, which we have linked into our document, and we need to reference this. Now, for IDs, we reference using a hash, and for classes, we reference using a dot. So hash for ID, dot for class. So all I need to say is hash, and then the name of the element, so the keyword that we've given it, which is container. Now we use curly brackets to determine the properties and the property values of each style. So I'm going to use not to determine, sorry, to enclose them in a block. So I'm going to start a curly bracket here, and I'm going to end a curly bracket here. So nothing really too complicated. All of our properties and property values are going to go in here. So nothing's changed now. All I've done is I've created a sort of container wrapper for this. Now you can see that it's popped up in our Element Explorer, which makes it really easy to just go in and start styling things up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it from the file. I'm not going to do it from here. We'll get to that a bit later on. But I'm going to set a background color. So I'm going to say background colon. So this is the property name. The property name is background, and now we need to give it a value. Now again, we're not going to go too much into colors or anything like that, but I'm going to say hash EEE, which is sort of a grey color. So you might know hex colors. That's great. We can use them in CSS. Okay, so container we've styled. We've set a background of hash EEE, and you might have noticed I've put a in programming usually called a line terminator, but in English it's called a semicolon. So I've put a semicolon at the end of that line. Now what I can also do now is go ahead and put more properties here properties and their value. So it'd be like property value, value, and then continue to go down and just do that over and over again, and we can have as many down here as we want. Okay, so that's how we declare different properties and their values, and it's just really a case of learning, you know, different properties, what they are, what they do, you know, and then you can start to style stuff up. It does get a lot more complicated. It seems easy, but you know, stick with me. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh our page. You can't really see it. I mean, you might be able to see it on your screen, but I've got a super bright monitor. Let's go ahead and style it black, so 000, and then we'll be able to definitely see it. Okay, so you can see that the container is now styled with a background color of black. You can see that Chrome has identified this. It's actually given me the textual representation of the color, which is fine. You know, we could use this within CSS. It's, you know, totally totally your own preference. In CSS3, you're allowed to specify, or newly specify, sort of textual color names, which we'll be going into later anyway. So background is black. We've done that. Now we've got a problem. We can't really see our links very well. We want to go ahead and change their styles as well. Now remember, we've got these set as classes, so we don't need to style them individually because they belong to a class called special. So inside of here, we want to come down and we're going to set a new selector for special. So this is called a selector, by the way. Selector here and selector here. So we're going to do exactly the same thing with our curly brackets. It doesn't change. The only thing that changes is this dot. You can see that my text editor has highlighted this class in red and this ID in blue. It helps if you get a good text editor that lets you see, you know, what you're doing properly. Okay, so we've created a selector for our special link. Now we want to go ahead and give it a color. So I'm going to give it a color of FFF, which is white. So let's go ahead and open up our browser and click refresh. You can see that our links have changed to white. So usually we would use an A selector to sort of give our entire, well, every link on our page, you know, a special well, the properties for links on the page, and we do that by selecting an element itself. Now we've assigned a class to this which really has added unnecessary markup, so let's go ahead and get rid of that. Let's instead go ahead and set all links on the page to the color white. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. Now this time I'm going to say A. Now you can notice, or you will have noticed, that I haven't used a dot or I haven't used a hash. That's because we're directly selecting an element, and we can go ahead and set a color for this. So color FFF. Now let's go ahead and refresh the page and take a look at what's happened. We've just got white. Now you can see that when we click on this, we've got a color white. So perfect, works. Now what happens if I go ahead and create another link outside of this container? Well, you've probably guessed. When I do, you'll see that when I refresh, we can't see it because all links on the page are styled white. Now to get around this, we simply go back to our style sheet and we say hash container A. So hash container A, this means all A's within container. And there is a correct way to do this, by the way. I'll go through that in a later part of the video series. But let's go ahead and refresh and see what's happened. You can see that outside of the container, the links have remained at their default color. And we can go ahead and style them individually. Okay, so I've run a bit over what I planned to in this tutorial, which was an introduction to CSS, how to include a style sheet on your page, and then a bit about classes and IDs. Hopefully you've got the general gist of things. In the other tutorials we're going to look a bit more in depth into here, so don't worry if you didn't understand anything. So that's a basic introduction to CSS, and I'll see you in the rest of the videos.